Every Sunday night, Ed Sullivan welcomed America into his living room with a smile and a calm handshake. But in 1955, something happened backstage that shattered that image completely. A young musician changed a single song, and in seconds, Sullivan went from controlled to enraged, unleashing words so shocking that crew members froze in place. What followed was a confrontation so explosive it nearly turned physical, was buried for decades, and ended with a lifetime ban that quietly altered the course of rock and roll forever. Ed Sullivan was born on September 28, 1901, in Harlem, New York, one of a set of twins. His brother Daniel died just months after birth, leaving Ed as the sole survivor, a loss that quietly shaped his childhood. He was the third of 8 children born to Irish parents Peter and Elizabeth Sullivan, though only 5 survived infancy. Their home was lively but shadowed by grief, and when another baby died, the family moved north to Port Chester, hoping for peace that never fully came. Growing up, Sullivan was often called the miracle child, raised in a neighborhood rich with different cultures, sounds, and music. His parents clung tightly to him, especially his mother, and music became the family's refuge. They sang together around the piano, using songs to soften the weight of loss, a comfort Sullivan would remember for the rest of his life. As he grew older, Sullivan developed a strong sense of discipline and control. In high school, he excelled in sports, earning 12 athletic letters between 1916 and 1919. He stood out most in baseball, serving as catcher and team captain, a role that fed his natural authority and leadership. That need to direct and command would later define his public persona. At 17, he tried to run away to enlist in the Navy during World War I, but was turned back for being underage. Soon after, he found his true path in journalism. He wrote sports columns, edited his school paper, and was hired by the Port Chester Daily Item for $1 an article. Sports also shaped Ed Sullivan's sense of fairness. As a young athlete, he played alongside black teammates without a second thought, and when he faced integrated teams in Connecticut, it felt completely natural to him. That early belief in equality stayed with him, and years later on television, he would give black performers a platform at a time when many hosts refused to do so. In 1919, Sullivan believed he was taking a major step forward by leaving the Port Chester Daily Item for the Hartford Post. Instead, disaster struck almost immediately. The paper folded within his first week, leaving him jobless. It was an early lesson in how unstable the newspaper business could be, but it only hardened his resolve to succeed. The setbacks continued. After joining the New York Evening Mail, that paper shut down in 1923, beginning years of uncertainty. From 1923 to 1927, Sullivan moved between struggling outlets, including the Associated Press, the Philadelphia Bulletin, and several New York papers. Most reporters would have quit, but Sullivan treated each collapse as another chance to sharpen his skills. His time with the Associated Press proved especially valuable, giving him national exposure and a growing reputation for adaptability. In 1927, Sullivan finally found firmer ground at the New York Evening Graphic. He rose quickly to sports editor, his first true leadership role, and soon crossed into show business as the paper's Broadway columnist. That position expanded his influence and introduced him to the entertainment world that would define his future. When the Graphic folded in 1932, Sullivan was no longer just another reporter. He was already a recognized name. In 1932, Ed Sullivan became the Broadway columnist for the New York Daily News, launching his influential column, Little Old New York. For the next 4 decades, readers followed his sharp, fair take on Broadway shows, stars, and backstage drama. A single mention could make, or break, a career, and with the column syndicated nationwide, Sullivan's reach extended far beyond Manhattan. His ability to adapt kept him powerful well into the 1970s. The column doubled as a talent pipeline. Sullivan had a knack for spotting performers early, and a kind word from him could ignite a career. Producers and actors checked his column daily because one line could sway a show's fate. He wasn't just reporting entertainment, he was shaping it. At night, Sullivan held court at the glamorous El Morocco Club, while his rival Walter Winchell dominated the Stork Club. Their rivalry defined New York nightlife. Being seen at either venue could elevate or damage a reputation. Sullivan also expanded into radio. Beginning in 1932 on CBS, he hosted a series of shows that brought him into millions of homes, featuring stars like Jack Benny and George M. Cohan. Radio proved he was more than a columnist. It made him a trusted, recognizable voice in show business. In 1948, CBS took a gamble by hiring Ed Sullivan, a newspaper columnist with no television experience, to host a new Sunday night variety show, Toast of the Town. Producer Marlo Lewis believed Sullivan's plain, no-frills style might work, even if Sullivan himself was skeptical. When the first episode aired on June 20th, 1948, the budget was tiny, just $1,375, and even stars like Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis were paid only $200. Sponsors hesitated, executives worried he lacked sparkle, but CBS chief William Paley stood firmly behind him. Critics were merciless. They mocked Sullivan's stiff delivery and called him wooden, awkward, even talentless. Some reviews were so harsh that Sullivan took them personally, firing off angry notes in response. Yet audiences kept tuning in. Comedian Alan King famously joked that Sullivan did nothing, better than anyone else. Instead of fighting the jokes, Sullivan leaned into them. He allowed comedians to impersonate him, and viewers warmed to his willingness to laugh at himself. His hunched shoulders, nasal voice, and famously tight smile, once compared by Time magazine to someone sucking a lemon, became part of the show's charm. By 1953, the program had moved into its iconic home at CBS Studio 50 on Broadway, a converted theater that required serious technical improvisation. Against all expectations, Sullivan's unlikely presence had become the backbone of a television institution. Ed Sullivan had a deep affection for his theater, and in 1967, marking 20 years on the air, CBS honored him by renaming it the Ed Sullivan Theater. It was a rare tribute for a television host. The building still stands today and later became home to David Letterman and Stephen Colbert, though it remains most closely associated with Sullivan and the stars he introduced there. By the mid-1950s, audiences already thought of Toast of the Town as Sullivan's show, and on September 25, 1955, CBS made it official by renaming it The Ed Sullivan Show. The change mattered to Sullivan. It confirmed his power in television. A year later, he booked Elvis Presley, whose appearance drew an astonishing 60 million viewers and permanently sealed Sullivan's legacy. Behind the scenes, however, Sullivan could be volatile. On November 20th, 1955, Bo Diddley was told to perform 16 Tons, the hit made famous by Tennessee Ernie Ford. But on live television, Diddley chose to play his own song instead. The crowd erupted and many Americans heard the signature Bo Diddley beat for the first time, an electric moment that helped push rock and roll forward. Sullivan was enraged. After the show, he shouted at Diddley, used a racial slur, and banned him from ever returning. The confrontation nearly turned physical before staff intervened. That explosive temper wasn't a one-time thing. Sullivan's daughter, Betty, later said her father was known at home for sudden outbursts over minor issues. On screen, he appeared calm and courteous. In private, his anger could surface without warning. It was a side of Ed Sullivan few viewers ever saw, but one his family lived with every day. Ed Sullivan's daughter, Betty, later explained that her father was nothing like the warm, outgoing figure viewers saw on television. Off camera, he was deeply introverted. After broadcasts, instead of socializing with guests, he often retreated to his dressing room. At home, he could spend hours alone, quietly reading or watching television. This wasn't moodiness. It was his nature, and the contrast made even colleagues mistake him for distant or cold. The pressures of the Cold War added another layer. In the late 1950s or early 1960s, Sullivan became convinced, without evidence, that Betty's boyfriend might be a communist sympathizer. He questioned her intensely and even considered barring the young man from the house. Despite his public support for civil rights and inclusion, Sullivan was not immune to the paranoia of the era. Family members also described him as emotionally guarded. His grandson, Rob Precht, said Sullivan rarely showed affection or spoke openly about feelings, likely a defense shaped by early loss, the death of his twin brother and a young sister. That restraint made him seem hard, but those close to him believed it hid a man who felt deeply and struggled to express it. That same tension surfaced with performers. On September 17, 1967, the Doors were booked to appear. Producers demanded a lyric change in Light My Fire, asking them to remove the word higher. The band agreed in rehearsal, but privately, Jim Morrison told them they would change nothing. Guitarist Robbie Krieger later recalled thinking it was a joke. It wasn't. Live on Air, Morrison sang the lyric as written. Millions watched, the audience roared, and Sullivan's carefully controlled stage had just been challenged again. Backstage, the atmosphere was explosive. Producers were furious, and Ed Sullivan stormed into the dressing room after the broadcast, shouting that the band had betrayed the trust of the show and the network. Witnesses said he cursed at them and immediately banned them from ever appearing again. The band barely reacted. When someone warned they'd never be back, Jim Morrison reportedly shrugged and replied, "But we just did." The moment captured the defiant spirit of the Doors. They had used the biggest stage in America and refused to bend. That clash became legend, but it wasn't the first time rock music collided with television standards. On January 15, 1967, the Rolling Stones appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show to perform Let's Spend the Night Together. CBS objected to the title, calling it too suggestive, and demanded a lyric change. Under pressure, the band complied, singing, "Let's spend some time together instead," though they were clearly unhappy. The incident became one of rock's most famous censorship battles. In the U.S., radio stations followed television's lead, sometimes refusing to play the song at all, while in the UK, it aired uncensored. During the performance, Mick Jagger made his feelings unmistakable, rolling his eyes exaggeratedly at the camera with every revised lyric. The audience noticed, and so did the producers. Mick Jagger's exaggerated eye rolls quickly became famous as a subtle act of protest. Unlike Jim Morrison of The Doors, who refused to change his lyrics and was banned outright, the Rolling Stones followed the rules, while quietly mocking them. Whether planned or instinctive, those few seconds became a lasting example of rebellion without open defiance. That tension wasn't new for Ed Sullivan. On October 19, 1964, comedian Jackie Mason ran into serious trouble during a live broadcast. When a speech by Lyndon B. Johnson cut into Mason's set, Sullivan signaled from off-camera that he had 2 minutes left. Mason began joking about fingers, pointing around the stage. From Sullivan's angle, it looked like an obscene gesture. Sullivan was furious. He canceled Mason's 6-show contract, worth $45,000 at the time, and publicly labeled him unstable. Mason denied any wrongdoing, sued for libel, and lost. The fallout was brutal. Television doors closed, and his career stalled for years. Even after Sullivan later apologized and invited him back, the damage lingered. The incident became a stark reminder of Sullivan's power. He wasn't just a host. He was a gatekeeper, and crossing him could end a career. Ed Sullivan was famously strict about who appeared on his show and how they performed. Artists were expected to follow his rules, so much so that even Elvis Presley was once filmed only from the waist up. Sullivan decided what was acceptable for American living rooms. Yet behind that control was a side few expected. He consistently booked black performers at a time when segregation was still widespread. Beginning in 1948, Sullivan gave African American singers, dancers, and musicians a national platform. When sponsors objected, he pushed back, once even ejecting a Ford executive from the theater. On his stage appeared Louis Armstrong, Ella Fitzgerald, Sammy Davis Jr., The Supremes, The Temptations, and James Brown, as well as civil rights figures like Coretta Scott King. While Sullivan could quietly blacklist performers who crossed him, his public commitment to showcasing black talent was unmistakable. The show ran for 23 years on CBS, from June 20th, 1948 to June 6, 1971, airing more than 1,000 episodes. Sullivan introduced America to stars from Elvis to the Beatles. Their February 9, 1964 appearance drew about 73 million viewers, a record at the time. Comics like Richard Pryor and Carol Burnett also broke through on his stage. When the show was canceled in 1971, it marked the end of an era. Sullivan's private life was more complicated. He had married his wife, Sylvia Sullivan, in 1930 after keeping their relationship quiet due to religious differences. She became his closest confidant, offering blunt feedback after every broadcast. Her death in 1973 devastated him. A year later, Sullivan was diagnosed with esophageal cancer. His family chose not to tell him the full truth. He died on October 13, 1974, at age 73, with a funeral at St. Patrick's Cathedral. In later years, family members, including his daughter Betty and grandson Rob, spoke openly about his perfectionism and temper. They described a man who could be warm and generous one moment, controlling and furious the next. To millions, Ed Sullivan was a stiff, polite host. To those closest to him, he was far more complex. And that was the side only they truly knew.